Hello, folks. Can y'all hear me okay? Cool. Just looking to see if there's any last minute pull requests. Looks like there's at least
Hey everyone.
a couple. Hello.
Hi.
Hi Ivan.
Give it another minute or so for everybody to find their way here. And I'll keep looking for any pull requests that show up. We've got a very healthy agenda today.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
It's a lot going on. All right, I think we can get started. Welcome everybody to the June working group meeting. Of course, as a reminder by all of us joining, we agreed to the membership agreement, which hopefully we've all signed. Participation guidelines and code of conduct. There's links there in the agenda in case you ever want a refresher. And then, as we always do, let's do a quick round the room just to put names to faces. We'll go in the order in the agenda doc, and then if we missed anybody, then we'll pick them up at the end. And we'll start with me. So hello everybody, my name is Lee.
Hey everyone, I'm Benji, open source maintainer working on the GraphQL suite.
So I think I'm next. I don't have it open yet. I'm Rob. I'm working at Shopify on API stuff.
I'm Michael Stapp. I'm working with Chili Cream and we are working on the hot chocolate.NET implementation.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm at Facebook.
Rob from First Dibs, working on Defer and Stream.
Brian, I think you're up next, if you're here.
Oh, hey, I'm Brian. I'm with Apollo GraphQL, and I am also working on Defer and Stream, so I'm happy to talk about it.
I'm Evan. I'm with Rob at Shopify.
Mike Cohen, I work for Indeed.com.
I'm Sasha. I work at Twitter, and I'm just here as a fly on the wall to hear about all the cool things.
Hey everyone, I'm Robert from AWS.
Hi, I'm Ivan, and I help to maintain GraphQL.js.
And hi, I'm Steven. I'm at Netflix.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I've yet to submit my PR to add myself. I'm Gabriel McAdams. I'm helping on the GraphQL over HTTP spec.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Yakov. I'm helping work on defer and stream and GraphQL tools schema stitching.
I think we've got everybody. Great. So the last couple folks, feel free to send pull requests. I'll get your names up on the agenda. I see we have, as per usual, Benji on notes. Anybody else want to volunteer to help out, especially since Benji is going to inevitably jump into discussion at some point? You'll find there's a link to the Google Doc at the top of the agenda file. I don't hear anybody saying anything, but if one or two people could jump in and help. Oh, excellent. Thank you. I see a handful of folks in the notes, which is great. All right, let's take a quick look down the agenda and make sure that we got everything here we want to talk about. We're going to talk about last meeting's action items as per usual. I'm going to give a very brief update on the next version of the spec. The schema coordinates. Haven't talked about that one for a few months, but I think that one's ready to advance. Similarly, so with full Unicode support, we also haven't talked about that one in a little while, but that one I think is also ready to advance. Fragment arguments RFC, that one's on Matt. Defer and stream, we have two separate agenda items for. I imagine that's for spec and then future looking stuff. And that's everything we have. Does that sound right? Anything else you all want to talk about?
Last minute modifications. I just removed the one-off topic for various reasons, but mostly because there's nothing to discuss. And Mark has also messaged in the working group channel to say he's not available. So that relates to the schema coordinates. You've got your name on there as well, so I'm not sure whether you're going to continue to discuss that.
I'm happy to cover it.
Okay, lovely.
All right, let's dig into action items. I actually updated the links this time in the agenda file first because I always confuse the hell out of myself when I open this thing up and see a bunch of closed issues. So the first one is everything that's ready for review. And then the second one is everything that's open. And we still have 21 open action items, which is a lot. I suspect some of these are probably ready and I just didn't review them all to see if they're ready for review. But let's do a quick rundown through the handful. We got 6 that are ready for review. So I'm going to start at the top. First of these, schema coordinates, add functions GraphQL.js for parsing and printing. Guess what? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So I'm closing it. Next one, feature freeze on GraphQL.js repo and pin it. I think this has come and went and is no longer frozen. Yvonne, please tell me if that's accurate.
Yeah. Like we switched to TypeScript, and you also help like clean up last bits of workarounds. Yeah, so it's like good news with fully switched to TypeScript, and so now everything unblocked, and I start merging like PRs. Yeah, I need to keep up with like reviewing a bunch of stuff, but in general, yeah, everything unfreeze, everything ready. Nothing major is expected. Like it will be some cleanup after TypeScript migration still, but like we can switch some things to enums and use as like constructs. But I don't expect anything that's like touch the entire PR. By the way, if anybody needs help with updating their like PR to TypeScript, Sahid volunteered to help with that, and I can help. Just ping me in Slack somewhere.
Huge shout out to Sahid who pulled the lion's share of that TypeScript migration. There was a massive amount of work there, so he did really awesome work. I got to pitch in at the end to help fix some things to use strict mode. But yeah, very exciting to see that we're finally on pure TypeScript. So that one is closed. And next up, we have write a list of topics to cover in the spec release marketing. And this one, I have a changelog. I'm actually going to leave this one open on Brian for now, because in the next marketing review meeting, we want to pull out highlights. So that changelog is really just like a detailed list of everything that's changed, and I want to pull out some highlights. So that'll help with the press side of things. So I'm going to leave that open for us for now. And I'll probably just leave the ready for review because I'm sure it'll be done by next time. Next one, require argument uniqueness. And Benji, anything to update on this?
I think this was on Ivan actually.
Yeah, I volunteered, like, I think a long time ago I volunteered to help that, because like spec edit is simple. It's like writing validation rule. It's like little bit, not too much complex, but yeah. Let's do it. I will try to finish it now that I'm unblocked after TypeScript migration. Let's do it. I will try to create PR until next working group, and if not, we just put the issue and ask people to champion it. So
okay, I'll just leave this open as ready for review, just to know that you've grabbed onto it, just in case we don't want to lose track of it. It's exciting. Editorial review of no root introspection of subscription RFC. I think this is good to go. Editorial is complete. Yep. Closed. And then last one was, yeah, not only right over but merged. This one is good and closed. So closing that one as well. I don't think we need to go through all of our other remaining open issues, but just to look, we have 17 open action items. So I might take a scan through some of these after the meeting and see if I can't get some of these ready for review. Glad to see we got some actions done though. All right. Where'd my agenda file go? Okay, moving on. Oh, the next one is mine. Okay, so next update on the next version of the GraphQL spec. So last meeting, I mentioned that there were a small handful of remaining open issues, and I had set up that milestone to track them. The good news is that all of those are completed, which means the very last one was write a changelog. And so I have a pull request up that is ready for the TSC vote. This is an asynchronous vote, so TSC members are reading this and then sort of replying that they're good to vote on this. We'll probably force a vote at some point in the next couple of days, just so that we can get this closed, because this has been open now for just shy of 2 weeks. But take a look at this if you haven't. I pulled out all of the, I made a changelog file, which hopefully we can do this in the next cut as well, that just lists out all of the authors, all the changes, and it also shows a full diff. So if, you know, a lot of things changed. So if you want to get a sense of everything that's changed in the last, it's just like about 2 years, a little over 2 years, pretty wild. It's actually a lot of stuff that's gone into this. Let's take a look at that. So we'll probably have that up and landed as soon as we can complete that vote. That's the update there. Happy to take questions if there are any.
I have like small suggestion and maybe like tiny discussion. Like we have this 80 characters limits on a width of spec, so entire spec is formatted. So every time somebody add like a word, everything is like reshuffled. So since like it's text, it's not a code, and since like we have word wrap in like new editors. Maybe we'll throw quiz through, and it will improve diff experience, PR experience, everything. So because right now diff is not reviewable, really, it's like huge piece of green stuff, a huge piece of red stuff, and huge piece of green stuff. So you don't see individual like words of stuff changed.
Yeah, I found that too when I was reviewing it. What I did is I used a custom git diff algorithm that ignores all white space, not just white space at the like beginning and end of lines, but everywhere. It's a command that I often use when Prettier changes code, and I want to make sure that nothing in particular has changed. I did consider proposing that we adopt that, but the issue with it is it effectively puts all of the diffs in line with like curly braces, and it kind of looks very weird and unnatural to people who are used to reviewing diffs. Another alternative that I considered was actually, given that we can format the specs with Prettier now, I thought what we could do is keep the spec formatted nicely in the repo, but then before we're about to do the comparison, format it with Prettier using the absolute like maximum line length, 9,900 or whatever, on both the previous and the current revision. That way all of the line break changes won't be included in the diff. Just a couple of ideas I came up with when I was reviewing it.
This seems worthy of a full discussion, because it seems like we've got some alternatives to consider. So maybe let's take an action to open this as an issue and hash this out. Good suggestion. Anything else on this?
Do we want to block, like, do we want to block the actual TSC review process on having the changelog be easily formatted, or is that not worth it? Like, we want to get the 2021 edition out ASAP, so we want to.
Yeah, I'm not going to block it on that.
Yeah, like
it'll help legibility, but shouldn't change content.
I brought this question because it's like stuff. I review PR before working group, and it was my first experience. I read like all individual everything that I merged like bunch of stuff, and I read all the other stuff that other people merge. So I'm up to date on that. So it's not blocking me, just like no experience wise. Things that we can do better.
Yeah, I think the one thing that it might block is Benji's had a long-standing PR open to apply Prettier directly to all of our source files. And we should just kind of decide, do we want to keep an 80 character line length, or do we want to have infinite line length for the actual source? Sounds like that discussion will yield an impact on that. So looking forward to
if we're adopting Prettier, then we can change the line length at any time in future, and we can even like omit it from the diffs potentially as well. So I think that shouldn't block that going ahead, I think personally.
That's probably true. Just thinking if we want to avoid two immediately followed PRs, one where we land it and one where we decide to take the line length out. Okay, I know we got more stuff to talk about, so we can move on. Looking forward to resolving that conversation online. So schema coordinates update. I've been doing some work over the last couple of months to get this in a state where it can move from draft to accepted. I believe the spec text itself has not actually changed. It's remained at draft for a number of months now, I think since April. And I've been working on a reference implementation. The reference implementation, I've required some other changes, which Yvonne merged earlier today, actually. So I think the only thing left is to take a look at that PR and make sure that it's doing all the things we want it to do. And if we believe that that's the case, especially since the spec text itself hasn't changed, just looking to see if there's any opposition to moving this to approved.
Like, I reviewed just before working group, so I didn't have time to left a comment, but I think it's actually very helpful that you create a subsequent PR to adopt it for error messages, because that way, like coordinates is actually used for something. And the second thing, it's actually uncovered a couple issues for me. First is like meta field, like with angle brackets, which is kind of like hack in a sense because it's not parsable. So like underscore type name, underscore schema, and underscore type, it's a fields, but the problematic fields, schema and type is easier because you at least can attach it to something. You just don't know the name. It's hard to figure out the name of like root type because it can change. But underscore type name is like weird because it's attached to every output type but not input type. So in a sense, like if people start using it for something, we need to make decision on like what to do with these fields. Should they always be handled specially? Because like if it's an insider message, it's okay. But if we, for example, Benji uncovered, like, I think half a year ago, uncovered interesting things that path inside the error, it's like show where error is occur, but not on what field, because of like interfaces and unions. You don't know like this field belong to what type during execution. So it would be cool to also pass a list of schema coordinates in error back. But like if that fields like, so if we start using schema coordinates for fields outside of like error messages, being not able to represent like all the fields in uniform fashion create like a problem, special casing.
Yeah, right now the spec text reads that a meta field does not have a schema coordinate. Or the actual wording is a schema coordinate must not refer to a meta field. And so I think I'm happy to talk about that specific case within the bounds of that PR, because what you mentioned before is accurate. It's a bit of a hack. It's a way to make sure that we can print those, even though they're not really schema coordinates. But if you want to, if that's reasonable opposition to approve this, then we can hold it.
It's like, for me, it's more like we need to make decision and we need, like, I didn't read the spec text. I didn't use it. You actually specify in spec text, but I've one of the thing I think we need to consider like usage outside of error message, usage where like it's used for something, and see like if underscore type name create a problem for that. Yeah, and another thing, except for default values, we like through entire GraphQL spec, we prefer like structural data. So that introspection is not like SDL, it's not a string. So one of the like things that I kind of don't like is that we don't have structural representation for schema coordinate. Like we have IST node, but in your PR where with the error messages, we attach strings to types. So if you get argument and want to see like what type it belongs to, you need to do parsing. So like one thing to consider maybe in parallel to like string representation, maybe to have like structural representation as like object.
Interesting. Maybe we should move this conversation offline in the context of that PR. I hadn't considered a use case for a non-string representation of these. I want to make sure that it's valid and we need a specification for that if that's something that people are going to use. I think right now we don't have that, but okay. Happy to leave this still as draft and not approve it until we've resolved these questions. Moving on, another one that is, yeah.
One note, since like this issue was uncovered by like second PR that start using schema coordinates. If somebody else have ideas on how schema coordinates can be used in reference implementation or in a spec, I think like not discussing it like theoretically, but if somebody can suggest stuff that he will want to use it or stuff that will improve like overall developer experience or other stuff, please write it so like we can shift discussion to concrete use cases and see like how they fit concrete use case. I think it will improve general proposal.
Where's the best place to leave that feedback on the RFC?
Sure. Yeah, either of those two PRs are completely reasonable places to leave feedback. Any other thoughts or comments on schema coordinates before I move on? All right, moving on. Full Unicode support. This one has been at proposal for a very long time. I think a year. I am looking to move this now to draft. I believe we have pretty high confidence in the direction that we have. So I actually brought this to this group last month, which was before we had feedback from some Unicode experts. So I gathered some feedback from a handful of folks I've worked with in the past who are Unicode experts, and gave some feedback, and then made some changes to the RFC. So I'll detail through some of those because it's easy to lose track of them in just the comment threads. So we've changed the source characters in GraphQL to just any Unicode scalar value, which basically means any valid Unicode value, anything that could potentially be a character. Before we forbid the ASCII control characters, that was a little bit weird because we didn't forbid non-ASCII control characters. And I think I found the original RFC that added those, and it was a little bit on shaky ground. So I'm going to propose getting rid of that and just making it very, very simple that sources are just Unicode scalar values. Clarified the semantics for how escape sequences can be used. There's these sort of legacy, like 2, 4-digit Unicode escape sequences to encode higher plane characters. That Java and JavaScript, you'll find them there. And people have just been using those in GraphQL, and a lot of our representations actually will just support that just fine, even before this. So I think we need to keep doing that so that those patterns don't break. And so I added a subsection that kind of describes how those work, and then have incorporated all this into the PR. The PR actually might be, the implementation PR might be an easier way to read kind of how this is going. So if you want to kind of understand exactly what's happening here, I kind of recommend reading these in opposite order, starting with the code and then reading the spec. So I know this has been open for a bit, and there have been updates in the last few weeks, but if everyone's feeling good with the direction this is heading, would love to move this to a draft rather than just a proposal.
I look through code and everything sounds reasonable. One thing is like complexity of like variable length escape sequences. It's had like bit of complexity, but at the same time I look like programming languages implement them, so it's like expected. So like
I think that's our last open question. Yeah, and that's why I'm not asking for full to jump all the way straight to approval. I actually feel highly confident in where both the spec text and the implementation are right now, but I do think that that's sort of one open question, whether we want to allow that, and our Unicode experts sort of frowned on it, but I think we've got a trade to make between doing a thing that's weird and doing a thing that could break people, and I want to avoid breaking people.
So the main change of this is that we now allow you to have 16 code points, or because all the type information and stuff like that, or the actual query logic is still ASCII. Only comments and string values are can contain Unicode. And essentially, if I want to put all those emojis in there, I would use a Unicode code points.
Yep. Yeah, you can use either just a straight up code point, or you can use an escape sequence. So it adds variable length escape sequences, so you can escape sequence them directly.
Okay.
It adds surrogate pair escape sequences, which is sort of the legacy way people have been doing this, just because of a hack of how the lexer works in GraphQL JS and GraphQL Java, at least. I'm proposing to add just explicit support for that. But if you take a look at the spec text, I kind of call out that this is legacy, and if you're printing a string, you shouldn't print it that way. But if you're parsing a string, you should understand it correctly.
Should be average pass, okay.
Yeah. I think my biggest open question at the outset was whether we were handling the source character changes appropriately. I feel pretty confident that this is the right direction now. I went through a couple of changes in the last few months, figuring this stuff out, and I think this is the right way now. So I'm pretty confident that, barring this last conversation around whether we feel confident in continuing to include the legacy style double escape sequence, that this is in good draft state, especially since the PR is essentially fully working and has a full test suite. You support opposition to that?
Yeah, I think it's looks good. There is like some like questions I have, and I need to put them in spec PR, but overall I think it's reasonable. And
oh, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
No, like one of the thing, just to maybe like clarify it fast, is do we tie to particular Unicode version, or we say like any future Unicode like stuff is supported?
it doesn't tie to a specific version, which is what most other languages also do. Yeah.
And
Unicode
second,
is designed to be pretty forward compatible. So
and second first question is like, what about query variables? So we have strings there. I didn't review it, but do we support the same stuff there, like surrogate pairs and like other things in stuff that pass as query variables?
a query variable is a name the same way that a field name or an argument name is a name. And so this does not change the grammar rule for a name, which is still A to Z 0 to 9 underscores.
I mean, like a value, we have like GraphQL, like string scalar. It's have validation for values it's accept. And like, so if I send surrogate pair inside as like as literal inside like query, surrogate pairs are transcoded into a string, into like proper code. But what if I send surrogate pair as like outside of queries as like query variable payload? Like surrogate pairs are transcoded or not? Because like one of potentially what people can do is like inline arguments. Like people do like transformation, simplification for queries, especially like for some proxies or gateways or other things. So I think we need feature parity with query variables. And so like, I don't know, I didn't review what we have right now, but I think we should have same feature supported in both.
I agree with you generally, we should have the same. The Unicode rules that we apply to the grammar don't apply to values that come in the same way, just because the GraphQL spec doesn't have purview over them. We basically say you use whatever encoding you want for values, as long as they adhere to the sort of defined coercion rules. And for a long time, I think we've said that string values are Unicode text. So this PR actually clarifies that a bit, which hopefully will improve the point that you're making. But it doesn't say anything about escape sequences or surrogate pairs or anything like that for a non-literal value. So if it's GraphQL language, then yeah, like we got to read the characters and interpret them in some way. That's our job. But if it's like a JSON body or something, we leave that to the JSON spec to define. So as long as your internal string can represent that value, then you're good to go. But that's an implementation concern. But that's a good point. I think we'll take a careful read at the text and make sure that I'm pretty sure we already say that a string has to be Unicode text. But if there's anywhere else in the spec that we want to sort of repeat that point, maybe in the serialization form or something, that might be a reasonable place to do that. Okay, I'm going to move this one to draft. And
do you want to take an action item on that, Lee?
Yes. Thank you.
And I interrupt Mikhail. Mikhail actually wanted to ask something or say something. So sorry about that.
No, I actually interrupt you, but I found this. I was looking for the section where it states that it's legacy behavior, and I skimmed it. I will have a more thorough read through this. I think it shouldn't be a problem. It's just a bit reworking the parser, or actually the lexer.
Yep. take a look at the implementation PR, which might be a good place to start.
Yeah, I will.
I'll also note that I made a GitHub group called Implementers and invited a somewhat random chunk of people to it. A lot of folks that are here, but some folks that don't regularly attend working group meetings, but do maintain GraphQL implementations at Benji's recommendation. So thanks for that good recommendation. That'll give us a way to, if these things come up and we want to kind of let implementers know, we can ping them on GitHub, provided that they accept the invite and join that group. I'll drop a link in case anybody else wants to find it. It is.
Yeah, that would be good to have a link.
Yes, one sec.
Actually, for stuff like
put that link in the chat.
For stuff like Unicode, it would be great to have like somebody who implemented in another language and giving feedback, so we're not in like a JavaScript bubble and not optimize Spec to be like easier to implement in JavaScript or like sacrifice.
Andy and I have been working on this together, so he's been doing it in GraphQL Java at the same time, so that we at least have that. But Java and JavaScript have sort of the same quirk that they internally represent strings as UTF-16, and so there's this Elixir pass is kind of particularly quirky, where you have to like convert code points or code units to code points on the fly. Which my hope is that the vast majority of languages don't have to do that and can just sort of like do something more reasonable, or have sort of like native Unicode text or UTF-8 or something that gives them
we
something a little bit more
actually
reasonable.
We actually for .NET we have the same UTF-16 string, but to have a faster implementation, we are passing directly on the byte stream the UTF-8 stuff, so that it doesn't expand in memory. So I will have a look.
Very cool. Yeah. If you're on the byte stream, then you got to do the Unicode yourself.
Yes, that's the downside. And there's a 4.4 when I click on the link.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I have it set as visible.
Was it the link in the docs that you clicked? Because in the notes, because I may have just pasted it in wrong.
Yeah, I clicked on the link in the chat and it says not found.
Interesting.
Really?
I can see it.
Yeah, I think it's security thing from GitHub, so you can check like because there is a name of a group. So if you're not part of a group, it's written for.
Oh, there's something about the visibility. You have to be part of the organization. I don't know. Okay, good to know. I'll figure it out. Still kind of getting a handle on GitHub's visibility rules. I assume that those could be visible by all. That's not the case.
Maybe, yeah, suggestion. Maybe we put like issue on working group repo and pin it. So if anybody else want to be added there, like they can like leave a
Sounds
comment.
like a good action. Yeah. Good action. Happy to do that. Any other feedback, thoughts, ideas, comments on Unicode support?
Do you want me to assign that action to you, Lee, to create the document? Cool.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. All right. Thanks, everybody. Move that one to proposal. Keep hacking on it. Next up is fragment arguments. Matt, this one's yours.
Yep. So I just want to provide a hopefully short update and also time for people to comment and discuss. But basically, I took the feedback from the last working group that maybe we should just like treat fragment arguments as being part of the implementation. That was actually one of the easiest things to do in GraphQL.js, was to add a step where in the executor, when we hit a fragment spread that defines arguments, we just go through the fragment and say, oh, argument named foo, find all the variables named foo and replace them with the value that you passed. Is it performant? Maybe not. Maybe that specific implementation isn't performant, but it'll provide the right behavior. And so I've got that up on GraphQL.js plus a validation rule to turn it off by default, or to not allow you to write fragment arguments by default. The harder part is actually going to be defining the validation rules to provide good errors. Just because like we're now in a weird, previously all arguments are always defined either at the operation root, or variables are defined at the operation root, or you have like field arguments and the type of that field argument is defined by the schema. Whereas now we have arguments that are defined, whose type is defined within the executable document itself. And that is a little bit of a like weird thing to resolve with our current setup for validation. Yeah, so I have that. The RFC, basically the blocker right now is getting those validation arguments up for the JS implementation, GraphQL.js implementation. And then I'm not certain what the best next steps would be.
I have a hunch that validation is going to be the bulk of the work and will inform the executor. Like you have a thing that has the right behavior, but like as you apply more work to validation, that'll allow you to either do something more performant in the executor, or like you'll probably stumble on something. It's like, oh, right, that validation rule makes this thing possible or not possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the potential validation rules that might simplify the executor is one for only allowing constant values to be passed to the arguments. That would prevent having to like an implementation have to deal with like getting a variable from the query that then gets passed through. Another thing I'm explicitly trying to do with the validation rules right now is prevent requiring implementations to create a like variable or argument stack. So if we, for instance, allowed argument definitions of variables where those variables are used like 3 fragments below where they're defined, then you would have to carry all arguments that are passed through all the way down through during the collect fields phase. Whereas if we say you can only use arguments in the scope where, or you can only use variables defined as fragment arguments in that same fragment, then the collect fields scope is extremely limited and easy to implement.
That's fascinating. I can see arguments for either. Wanting to keep the scope limited seems very worthwhile, but I can see that being a tough restriction.
can we require that if you specify variables on Fragment, it's like all downstream fragments referenced from that fragment, you should explicitly pass like everything, and you cannot reference like from fragment with variables, you cannot reference fragments without variables. So like
that would be like, that was one of the options in the original issue that was posted in what, 2016. That was one of the options that Dan laid out. But now that we have this giant corpus of actual GraphQL, that would basically mean only new queries. Like you couldn't put a fragment with arguments into an existing, it would be difficult to add a fragment with arguments that then calls a fragment without arguments. And this spec RFC is almost explicitly preserving relays at arguments and at argument definitions implementation, where we allow both global variables and fragment local variables, and we allow them to be intermixed kind of at will.
Even as a same fragment. So I like, for example, I define like variable on the fragment, but explicitly, but I can also use variables implicitly, right? Even inside one.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's definitely a discussion point that we should, like, if that is a worry to have that mixed within the same fragment, we should definitely like discuss the pros and cons on the RFC.
This is great progress. Nice work.
Thanks.
So the next steps are to continue work on validation, continue work on execution. My other thought is, you know, the PR that you have up now is still in that kind of intermediate state where it's like added but then disabled. I would love to see if we can get this just like through the full process. If we need to chop it up into pieces from the landing things in GraphQL.js point of view, then so be it. But certainly from just like a clarity of understanding what's going on, you know, because I reviewed it before the meeting and I saw the no fragment argument usage validation rule, and I was like, wait, what? We're adding it, but then disabling it. It's like, oh, and then I remembered that you wanted to add it in sort of incrementally.
I'd also be interested if there's anybody else like interested in helping push this along, because there's probably like 4 or 5 different validation rules that need to be written, and I'd love, like, if someone's interested, to have their help. So I don't know if it's like, this is probably Ivan's purview, but I don't know if it's in a state where we should just either add it to a bookmark or a branch within GraphQL.js rather than coming from my own like personal repo and allowing other people to make PRs against that, or whether we should be pushing to commit it to GraphQL.js as is and iterating against master. Or main. I don't know, like, the best.
I would suggest having a pull, basically what you have now, the pull request open. You can always like allow other maintainers to be able to contribute to your PR so that multiple people can add to it, and then just start building a test suite. So it's like, here's all the things that we want to allow and disallow, and use that as the way to sort of gut check your validation rules.
Okay.
One thing why I requested this rule to be added, like that forbid during validation, is that people, it's like you start GraphQL server, especially if it's public or even internal, and people start using this feature for like whatever reason, like they enable some flag in relay and like they start sending these queries, and later we change something. And so it's like person is implicitly agrees to use experimental feature and depend on them instead of explicit. That's why I'm like, I'm okay to merge it even without validation, like all the validation rule, but with this one. So like if person is okay, he just disable one rule, and it's like hard enough to disable validation rules that it's like explicit decision. You need to write like 10 lines of code to enable it. So I'm like, maybe instead of branch, we can just merge it as is. Like just that comments everywhere that it's experimental, but I'm against flags. We try to use flags, and flags like complicates code, make everything like harder.
That makes sense to me.
I also anticipate the default value coercion stuff in this are going to end up colliding in hopefully straightforward ways, but in some way. So something to look out for. Anything else on this one?
Anybody else?
Nice. Good work so far. All right, let's talk about defer and stream. Rob, I'll hand it to you.
Hey, so sorry I haven't been able to make the past couple meetings, but I don't really have too much, but we just wanted to give an update. So we've been getting feedback. Most of the feedback has been either related to the transport or bug fixes or code improvements, not too much on the spec in general. So I'm working on a couple of refactors based on that. I rebased the GraphQL JS implementation onto main, changed everything to TypeScript, and Yvonne is going to publish an experimental version soon. And I think other than that, I'm waiting for 16 to be released, and then could start merging some stuff in to get ready for this version 17 alphas. And that's pretty much it for now.
Nice work. And Brian, I know you wanted to continue the conversation from there. So now that we've got updates.
Okay. Oh yeah, great. So so for GraphQL JS, the reference implementation is going to be in 17. Is that the plan, I guess, right now? Just wanted to clarify that. It's not going to be 16.
Yeah, we have like separate GraphQL JS working group. Uri helped to set up it like half a year ago. So we can go into more details there. We actually, last time we discussed it with Rob, and I think like videos on YouTube. So idea is that right now, a situation where we have like stable main, and when having like prepare for new release, it's like stressful and it's hard. And so idea is to, after 16.0.0, after TypeScript conversion, switch to unstable main. So we have like stable branch and we apply fixes if somebody discovers something, but to have like main and unstable one and publish like alphas and publish releases after set up like automatic release publishing after every PR. So every time something is merged, some alpha 10 or 20, 50 is published. And Kata spec releases like once a year or once a half a year, stabilize it for some time. So reverse. So right now, most of the time, main is stable, and like for a period of time it's unstable. But idea is to make it reversible, so it's unstable for most of the time, and it's allow us to experiment. So for example, we can merge stream and defer. People will use it. We like do even like breaking change, release new version, and when we stabilize it, we can publish. Plus, it's like mirrors spec like process, which is helpful that we have like two processes similar. So if we discover like based on feedback some problems, plus like all you probably knows in JavaScript ecosystem knows like problems with peer dependencies. So we cannot publish too many new versions of GraphQL.js, because every time a new new like major release is published, everybody needs to update peer dependency, and it's huge problem for ecosystem. Yeah. So to clarify, idea is like until next working group, like next month time frame, we publish 16.0.0. Wait like a couple, maybe a week or two to get feedback that everything is okay, and we branch it out into separate branch, switch to 17.0.0 alpha 1, merge stream and defer, and start working on it. So it's like time frame for it, it's like next month, maybe like 5-6 weeks. To get stream and defer merged into main and like start iterating on it.
That's great. Yeah, I'm excited to see the progress on defer and stream stuff in GraphQL.js. I have like one like drive-by code review thing that maybe I should just do it in the repository. But GraphQL.js is an early adopter of async iterators, right? Like one thing that like bothers me a lot is that there's often in GraphQL.js for subscriptions and defer and stream, there's always that promise of an async iterator, which I personally think is an anti-pattern, and I could go into that, but I've always thought that like so I think the GraphQL.js execute function is doing either it's either returning a promise or it's returning an async iterator if it's like if it's incremental, right? Is that how it's gonna work? Yeah, I always thought that it should just be promise or async iterator, not promise of an async iterator. But anyways, I just wanted to get like a read on like, yeah, where defer and stream stand. I've been working on defer for Apollo client right now. Like we're also planning on implementing defer and stream in Apollo server, which is exciting. I do have a couple questions about the spec, which I actually posted in an Apollo issue. I don't want to be like the spokesperson for Apollo, especially because we haven't really been participating as a company in these are just like my personal opinions, right? In the working group recently, and I just so I have questions like for the patches as they come in, like incrementally, like I mean, is there like a topological order? Like so like the first patch is like the initial result, and then there's this path, right? And do I have to treat it like make dir p, like in the sense that like to recursively create objects? Like, does that make sense, Rob? Or
I'm almost positive that the path that it's what you're taking, that what that path leads to should be an existing object or a array that the results there would get spread into or inserted into the array at that position.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the path could be going deeper than what was already in a previous result.
is that reflected in the spec yet? I'm not 100%. Like
I don't know, but that's actually also how we implemented that. So it has to be there. Otherwise, how would you patch that in? Then you have to fill in stuff that you don't have yet.
I think it's not in the spec.
And I think it's kind of logical when you create these deferred, essentially the deferred tasks, and you put them in a queue. And so it couldn't be any other way, because as you execute your graph, you come to a fragment that is being deferred that you put away for execution later, and you add these deferred tasks one after the other. I mean, it depends then still how you execute them. Do you parallelize this as well? Then you could get into the situation. But what we do is execute them one after the other, because we want to have a high throughput on the server. And if one request essentially would spread out, we couldn't process as many things in parallel. So it's essentially we iterate over them.
I think it's not explicit in the spec, but basically, to echo, I think what you just said, it's implicit in the algorithm that the spec does detail.
Yeah, that's what I basically meant when you read the algorithm. Kind of leads to that conclusion, but it wouldn't hurt to put a note in, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I could just keep going and asking questions or doing this async, and at any point you can stop me. What is the relationship between the incremental delivery stuff and also like batched queries? So like this is a little bit confusing, because the incremental delivery also has this concept of batching on some level, in the sense that multiple patches can come in at the same time. Yeah.
So that is actually very cleanly done, because incremental delivery is actually a part of the GraphQL over HTTP spec. So that is transport. And we are using the same spec now for batching.
Oh, okay.
And for anything else, because it describes how you can incrementally deliver content. So it's very, very good. So if you look at the GraphQL over HTTP spec repository, there is, I think Rob opened the PR, and I think it's already merged in RFC. Or yeah, we have an RFC document there, and that outlines the transport. So this is cleanly divided into the transport. That's the incremental delivery, and can be used for. I think we also did the examples there: batching, defer, stream, and stuff like that.
So there is, in a Apollo client, there's like a bunch of links, and the batching one is where you send a bunch of operations as like a JSON array and you receive a JSON array. I guess that's not what batching is anymore on your side.
So what we started, and there is no spec at the moment for that. So we started about a year ago on the GraphQL over HTTP spec. I think Ivan was initially pushing that, but nowadays a lot of people work on that. And that is trying to specify the transport. Until now, we didn't have something like that. So this is all there. Batching is not really yet specified. We have that. We have markers there that we want to do that. We have examples from Apollo, from our implementation, from other implementations. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but it kind of feels logical to have this incremental delivery do the transport for these things.
Yeah. Does anyone have a multi-part mixed like parsing library yet? Because I've just been doing it.
Yeah, there is one. If you look, there's a package Meros.
Yeah. I've seen that.
I worked with him on a lot of this stuff. When we built the server, he built this front-end library. We validated a lot with him. And I think Rob also knows him. This Marias worked also on the transport stuff.
Yeah, I have another one published too that also works with like XML HTTP request or fetch and falls back to either one.
Cool.
Yeah, so there's plenty of stuff.
I think I think both of them are linked in that RFC in the GraphQL over HTTP repo.
Cool. One question I have is this, so the decision to make defer work only on fragments. I did read something about that, but is it like one of the things that we at Apollo are kind of wondering is if it's like an arbitrary limitation insofar as you can have multiple fragments, inline fragments on the same,
It's actually very deliberate because
okay.
So putting just a defer fragment on a single field and could lead to people putting on multiple fields just these defer fragments because they want to just actually defer a bunch of stuff, but it essentially leads into a very bad performance issue where you defer essentially very small fields lots of times. And with this fragment, it becomes more clear that, okay, you're deferring this block essentially. So while it could be on theoretically, this is an artificial limitation. So you could put it on the field. It kind of is more making that more clear. This is a deferred block. This is something expensive. I mean, you're not making your whole request faster. You're just prioritizing delivery. And that makes it very explicit. The second thing is that in Relay, we also have this label and this fragment approach, so that fits also very good in that composition approach. But Matt knows, I think, more about these
also
concerns.
Joe on the Relay team had posted another reason. I don't remember the exact details about a few ways that it makes it more difficult to handle the payloads on the client when you could have either fragments or fields deferred.
I mean, from the backend side, it's really good to have them in a fragment, because it kind of put this logical boundary around things.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's a lot. Many people that come to that spec, that's the first thing they ask: why can't I just defer this field? But when they start thinking about what is the impact of deferring it and stuff like that, and also there was this discussion: is defer not really a deferable? And it kind of is, because the server doesn't have to defer that. So Hot Chocolate, for instance, inspects if you're just deferring the scalars that we anyway fetched in the call before, in the resolver before. We actually won't defer this stuff. We analyze the query plan of our execution first, and then see, okay, this part actually makes no sense to defer. So we give you the content straight away.
Relatedly, that's actually something that the mobile engineers are currently having a lot of issues with, like the idea that an operation which has deferred fields, it can come in all at once if the server decides that that's the appropriate thing to do. And so I'm not too familiar with this because I'm mostly working on the JavaScript stuff, but like in Kotlin, for instance, there is for Apollo Android, we're doing like code generation beforehand. So and so like just in general, your thoughts on like how defer and stream should work with code generation and type safety, like especially for environments like Kotlin or Swift.
So we did also for .NET strongly typed, so you have to really generate everything in advance. We essentially use the labels to mark a section in the graph that we generate, and then have this nullable, and it's essentially patched. So we use a reactive way to interact with our data. And then the graph completes, and it's nullable at the beginning. That's the way we did it. I don't know how others deal with that. Maybe also a good way. Yeah, Matt.
So we have had actually fairly significant problems with this as well. But the reason we had problems was because on our native code generation, a big chunk of it is using type models. So if you just have like a GraphQL user, and you're trying to access that in Java, you have no idea what was deferred or not. And like, you can't even tell, like from a UI perspective, am I going to be getting stuff in the future? I just kind of, the one solution to that is to just really, really rely on subscriptions. So like when you send a deferred request, you need to provide a callback, and you need to know that that callback is going to get called arbitrary number of times, and just like really, really heavily accepting the data might get updated like 14 times, and I have to be okay with that. Another thing that has helped a ton is we switched to, so we've transitioned from type models to request models. Request models still have this exact same problem, to fragment models. So Relay basically has a fragment model approach, but if you have strong boundaries in your models where they're like going from fragment foo to fragment bar that was deferred, it's very easy to say, oh, bar was deferred and all the and it's not here yet, so we'll give you back a null, and you just can't interact with it. And then when the callback gets called again and it is there, you can interact with it. That requires your code gen to have knowledge of which fragments are possible to end up deferred, and the code gen needs to have a way of asking the underlying data, like, okay, I'm about to like convert myself into bar. Was bar deferred or not?
And you're also using the labels in your code generation stuff to mark the sections that you received.
Yeah, we actually rely, like we input local to the, I don't know if this is what you mean by label, but we like extend our types. If we have a deferred fragment, we add a local to the client field that is foo fragment deferred. And on the like when we get the deferred responses, we'll set it to, we have a pass in our parser that sets that to false or true, depending on whether it came back. But that's like very implementation detail and is not.
No, that's also not what I mean. On the defer directive, you have a label.
Oh yeah.
You can put in like a marker.
Yes,
that's what I meant.
It seems like
it's by default. It's nullable, by the way, but we use it in our implementation. We use it as a mandatory field, so users have to set that.
I just had a question for implementers. I raised it on the spec in terms of the has next field. I'm just wondering if anybody who's implemented this already is as yet relying on it. I know that in a previous iteration it was called is final, and I think it was the Boolean value was flipped. Is that something
the reason
that people
for that
really
is,
need?
The reason for that is that we wanted to keep so when you have is final on there, then you would need to put it on every response. So that was a discussion here in the work group. Is final would have to be on every response to mark it as not final, because then you're looking for that. So we flipped in the discussion, the meaning was flipped to have an has next, because then you actually can send the response as is when there's nothing else. Then the response wouldn't be changed. And if there is a has next on it, then we know that it's actually a streamed response where we have multiple parts to it. That was the idea of the discussion.
Facebook actually originally implemented with is final. And I ran into a bug when I was trying to have a client that understood defer using is final hit a server that didn't implement defer, so never sent is final. So we would just like never close. We would assume that we still had more information coming forever.
So if I understand correctly, is that the main use of has next is for the initial response to see if meaning it's for the has next true rather than the has next false, to make
you don't have
that there are missing fields.
It has next false, you can essentially omit. You don't need that,
right?
Because if there is a has next true on this, you know there's another payload coming, as opposed to if there's nothing, you know it's final. And that's actually how GraphQL works. If you have a server that doesn't support defer, it sends you a response and that doesn't have has next on it. It has no extra property on it. So you know it's a final result. That's the state of today. So with the defer now, when a server says, okay, I have here something that is deferrable, and I actually defer that content, I send down a response that says, okay, that is not the final response. There is something else coming. There's next result coming, essentially.
Okay, but I mean, is it not the case that well, I guess it isn't. Okay, so then my next question then is, it gets into a little bit of an interesting interaction with streams. Right now in the GraphQL JS implementation, you can stream a field that the server will is you know, the backend is also getting an async iterable iterator stream, let's say. And in that case, the server won't really know. You know, the server on those payloads always says has next true, even if it's, you know, it can't even if it's not necessarily true. So meaning because it doesn't really know if there will be another payload until it checks for it.
I've had that question before, and I think effectively you can just send a final payload that says has next false but doesn't have anything else in it effectively.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, this is kind of like I guess for streams, it's not really that important, you know. But you know, the question in my mind is has next really the right term? Like, do we want to change it to like maybe has next or might be have next? I mean, it seems like it's doing something different for
you get another response in any case.
Stream.
Yeah. I mean, you get another response, even if it's empty.
Yeah, it's not has more data, it's has next response.
Right. So then if we want to say, are there more payloads at all? I mean, that's sort of like the way it is in GraphQL JS. Meaning, if you want to say if it's then you know that'll just be whether there are, you know, whether you got an initial result only or whether you got an async iterable iterator. You can figure that out just from the, you know, the overall transfer.
No.
Or at least in
on the
GraphQL.
You can figure it out on the server side, but even like from the client perspective, you just get a JSON response. It's unclear whether fields just like, especially if you're deferring a fragment that might not be like inside of an interface where your fragment is on some concrete type. It's unclear whether you like are going to get more or not, or whether it's possible for the server to give you more or not.
Okay. I think I get it. Thank you.
For streams in particular, like we talk about like deferring individual fields, how that could be a misfeature or could be misused in some ways. I'm also wondering, like, are there ways that we could not make streams, not let the stream directive be misused? If you know what I'm saying, like, you can do a poor man's subscription with a stream directive, right? You can do pagination. Like, there's no arbitrary, there's no like limit to like how many connections or how long the connections can be open for instance. Although like HTTP 1.1, you can only have 6 connections. Like, is there anything that we're doing to make sure that stream doesn't like expand in scope to include things like pagination or subscriptions or stuff like that? Is that?
Stream can be used for pagination, can't it? Like that's an actual explicit desire to use stream for pagination, I think.
Yeah, sure. But like it could also be used for subscriptions, right?
Yeah, no, kind of, yeah.
It is called out in the RFC that it's really not, and maybe also in the spec edits, that it's not really intended for long-lived connections, and it's really not about pushing data to a later time, but getting part of the data sooner. And in theory, not having the stream there, like the whole total length of the whole request shouldn't really change by much. But like, there's no validation or anything preventing that.
Yeah, it's important to call that out because there's like architectural implications of that. Like if you have a field that you have stream on where you expect that to be very long lived, you'd want to build a very different kind of actual like physical architecture than if you had something where you expected the like final payload to come within a number of seconds. And you'd probably want your transport to be different, right? Like hanging HTTP is like gets problematic if you're hanging for longer than 30 seconds. You get like weird error cases. But hanging HTTP and like multiple payloads is totally fine if you expect all those payloads to show up in the course of 2 or 3 seconds. So we should be pretty clear about that, right? That we don't want people to be using stream as a replacement for subscriptions.
But the misuse would be also here on a different level. Or like with defer, it's essentially protecting the user that's writing a query, whereas here would be the misuse by the backend engineer that allows that even to happen.
Yeah, true.
But I mean, for these things, you would then even, more go into live or so if you want to query that essentially works that way, where you get updates constantly for a longer time.
Yeah.
I think distinction is pretty clear that subscription is event-based. So something happened, you get payload, but stream is data-based. So like, for example, it's not only like to paginate, it can be used when you're generating data. So like some data is computationally heavy and you like generating and putting them in. So it's like based on data, not events. And I think maybe like specify somewhere, but it's clear like query is about the data, subscription is like the entire route is about events.
Yeah, my spies are saying that React 18 is on the horizon. Has there been any thought about like defer and stream with regard to like reveal order stuff, like like the suspense list reveal order? I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. I don't know if the relay people are working on that.
Yeah, that sounds like a relay.
Yeah. Oh, it's exciting. I'm very excited. Let me see if I have anything else.
I have questions over how or whether stream and defer should also relate to subscriptions. So I think it's quite clear that they shouldn't be applicable on mutations, but on subscriptions, to me, it's less clear. Like my gut instinct is, only support it on queries, but the whole point of stream and defer is to let you get part of your payload faster, right? So if your subscription is asking for real-time events, you might want those real-time events instantly, even if it takes an extra couple of seconds to, generate the avatar URL that's going to come along with it. So it may be valuable to have stream and defer for subscriptions, but I'm concerned that the multiplexing there may get more challenging, and you may end up with multiple subscription payloads from subscription events all having resolved, while still having the stream and deferred things continue to pile up in the background and potentially get quite expensive. So what's the status quo there? And yeah, what's the status quo there is the first question, Rob.
Yeah, I do have stream and defer implemented and spec'd out for both mutations and subscriptions. The way that it works for subscriptions is basically the async iterator, which may yield another async iterator from the original event, gets flattened into one. And so that means that you're not going to get the next event until the last deferred payload from the previous event comes. And I think that, so it's possible that you could have events from the subscription that are coming in pretty quickly and have a very slow resolver underneath that. And I believe now, even without defer, that would cause them to kind of get backed up. So this is not solving that in any way, because like I said, like the idea is to only get some data sooner and not like affect the length of the request. So it's still an issue with defer. It's just that in that case, you would be getting the event non-deferred part of the event payload a little bit sooner. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does make sense, and you raise a good point, which is, if you don't have defer currently and you're still requesting that same data, you're still going to wait for it in the same way. I think the serialization that you mentioned, where it waits for all of the previous streams and defers to complete before it then resolves the next payload, is sensible. And what that effectively means as well is that those events would pile up, the events themselves, but the resolution doesn't even necessarily have to start until the previous one is fully complete. So I think that does actually help to not have too much back-end work and memory usage pile up. Interesting that you've implemented it for mutations. Actually thinking about it, I can see how that would be useful. Has there been any pushback against that?
Not that I know of. I think it's pretty common, especially when you use relay, that you would have a fragment for a lot of your data, and that fragment would get spread on the query for the initial fetch, and then also on a mutation for when you want to update it. And that fragment may have another fragment that is another fragment that's deferred somewhere down the line. And so you wouldn't want to disable it on the mutation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does make sense to me.
There was,
So
I think, one weird case with that is the fact that multiple mutations in a single operation are executed serially. And we discussed that for a while last year, and I think came up with the conclusion that what ends up happening is that each mutation is only waiting for the initial payload of the previous one. So this is different than how it's working with subscriptions, which is a different case. But that first mutation is going to happen. Then all of the deferred payloads underneath that get pushed into the dispatcher queue, and that starts working while the next mutation gets executed.
Which can be then cause some challenging things, because you expect that the underlying fields actually return the changed state of the server. So you do the mutation, you have the beneath query fields that should reflect the changed state of the server, but that could now represent a complete different result, because we are queuing them, doing other stuff, because we cannot capture yet. We don't want to waste the performance. Do the other mutation, do maybe the third mutation, then we are executing these, and they are not returning the changed state of my first mutation. They are now returning the changed state of my third mutation. So in the case of mutations, I see that critical.
I guess there's like the most logical to me resolution of that would be the server could choose to implement defer so that it just ignores it in the first mutation field, underneath the first mutation field, and just like makes that entirely serial, but in the last mutation field, then deferred values are allowed. Like we definitely, even an implementation of defer within mutations that is just ignore the defer is better than like disallowing defer within a mutation.
Yeah, that's actually what we do. We ignoring them in mutations. But I would, if we specify them that how to execute them in mutation, I think that could be problematic for a lot of users that implement that then and don't realize what kind of effect that actually has for the contract that you actually tell your user, because you expect actually that these would then capture somehow the change and send it you later because you want to defer the processing. So what we do is just leaving them there, but they are not deferred. Like us, that's essentially what you can do also in the query when you think, when the server thinks, okay, that is better to be done inline, it ignores defer.
Have you guys considered like how this all works with like a normalized cache or an entity-based cache? Because there's like you could, if you have multiple operations which have deferred, like is it last write wins? Like is it operations come in order and though that's the older data, or is like how should all these
relay relay is a normalized cache and implements defer. So
is it like last write wins? Like so let's say you have operation A and operation 1 and operation 2. Let's say the operation 2 happens later, but then the deferred fragments in operation 1 come in later than operation 2. Is it like what happens?
For a mutation, I'd agree that could be a problem. I think Michael also agrees. But for a query, it wouldn't matter at all, right? Because like if you're just putting in the last value, well, a query is read only. So even within even while you're executing a query, the data might be changing underneath you. Like in the middle of your execution, somebody might have made a write to a database while you're like on one resolver. And then once you get past that resolver, the data is suddenly like different underneath you. Like that has always been a possibility with queries. Defer makes it a little bit more of a possibility, but like the last piece of data to come should be the most likely source of truth to the server.
But do you guys worry about like tearing, for instance, like if you send different variables with the operations and then you get deferred a deferred fragment from like
you have to normalize with the variables.
Right. Yeah. I guess. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the deferred task also captures can capture things like we have in our server implementation for queries, we have like the scope context where we preserve essentially the execution context and put that in the deferred task. I mean, it's a lot to this thing, so it's that's why I'm critical also on the mutation. I think that if we specify a flow for mutations, make that formal instead of I would really ignore it in mutations, because that causes so many problems for people that then start building a GraphQL server and don't think about these things, that I would really ignore it, or would make that even explicit in the spec that this should be ignored on mutation. On on subscription, however, you could do that. Subscription essentially is it's like a query, just that's event driven. Get an event, you execute essentially a query, send the result down. So it could be chucked down. I don't know how important that to most people is on subscriptions, but I don't see a problem there. But mutations is where we have all the side effects, so we shouldn't mess with them.
Oh, here's a question. How do errors work with incremental delivery? Errors can also have paths, right? In the sense that like specific fields can error. So if an error comes, like, can an error come in before the deferred fragment comes in? Like, is that
so? You could in each response could be a complete. It's like a complete GraphQL response could have an error.
Right.
Like you have this deferred task, yeah, that you then you delivered the main response, which might have had no error, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're starting work on your next resolvers that you actually had deferred, and there happens to be maybe a non-null violation. Then you have to report that in that deferred piece.
Sure. Yeah, but so is the path relative in that? Like the
no, that's complete because what you get this patch. We actually, our GraphQL ID, we implemented that already, and when you do defer, we complete the graph. So we are applying actually the patches of the first onto the data of the. We are applying the patches on the original response, and you see how your graph completes. So it should always refer to the complete graph. Because that's essentially what the user then uses. And that's also easier from the execution, if you think about that, because when you build up your deferred task object that you enqueue, then you capture actually the state, and you also capture the path of where you stopped executing or what you have deferred, and then just drill in from there. So if we would amend this path, it would actually get more difficult for the user.
Is this all reflected in the spec?
Yeah.
I think yes, because we have that in the algorithm where, Rob wrote there, where also what I said with the deferred tasks that are enqueued, that's all in the algorithm.
Yeah, it's in the algorithm, but some non-normative competence is something would be helpful, I think, maybe.
Yeah, no, what I mean is it's laying out what you have to do.
Yeah, I think there's another section that goes through each of the new fields that are on the patch responses, and I'm pretty sure it says, maybe that could be clarified more, that it's not relative.
But we should actually capture those things on the pull request or on issues. I also opened, I think, issues when I had something like this, and Rob then merged them in.
Yeah.
Because now, if we just discuss them here, they get lost.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. This discussion is really good because also we talked about mutations, and I haven't implemented all the last bit that Rob actually did. So I haven't read about this mutation. We just ignore the defer directive on mutation. But I will also make my notes.
Yeah, I definitely like to get more feedback on how the mutation should work. What we had, I think, is based on feedback that we got from Facebook last year. But it's definitely like a less conservative change than what it could be.
My gut says that you should do the same thing as you're doing with subscriptions. So you should wait for the mutation and its payload to complete before you go on to the next mutation. We've been talking about this for a little while. Do you want me to write down any actions to put in the notes, or are you happy just pulling them out for yourself later?
I can go through it and pull them out.
Cool.
Yeah, I can tell you that a lot of people and Apollo are excited for Deference Stream. Thank you so much for all the work you guys are doing on this stuff.
It's one of the coolest new features I have in GraphQL space.
Yeah, especially in mobile people, like web regardless.
Long time.
Yeah,
coming.
but we are not using it as in the projects I'm doing. We are also using that in websites. It doesn't. It's also there in web applications. A great addition.
Yeah, and we're using it with Relay.
Yeah, we too.
Awesome. Thanks for that great discussion, everybody. All right, that's the last of our agenda items. Anything else you want to talk about? Otherwise, we'll wrap the meeting.
I'm certainly interested in discussing merging this prettier pull request, because obviously it's quite large and I don't want to keep updating it.
Yes, I think the way we want to do that is I'm basically freezing the spec repo until the vote for the spec cut. And then we're going to do prettier right after that. And we should decide what we want to do about line length. So cool. Once we get those two things in, we're prettier firing.
Yep, sounds good. I think it will make diffing next time we do a spec cut. It will make that diff a lot easier, I think. So this will be good.
That's the hope. That's kind of why I was thinking we should just that should be the very first thing to land after the spec cut is we can do a diff from version cut to version cut. And then we can do a diff both from version cut to version cut. And then also version cut +1, which is just version cut, but with prettier applied. So you can see the actual changes that have been made instead of just seeing the prettier out. Prettier is just going to clobber everything in the spec text as it should. And hopefully that doesn't make it hard to review future lookbacks.
What I've found is that the actual generated HTML is pretty much identical. The only difference now is because we've got the GitHub links that link to specific lines of code, so those obviously change. But everything else is identical. So if you trim out that data tag, it's literally byte for byte identical before and after prettier in the generated HTML.
That's what we like to see. All right, folks, we'll end it there. Thanks, everybody. Great discussion. Glad to see all these things moving forward. See y'all next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See you next month. Bye.
Bye.